Hey there, it's Tom Ryan, founder and CEO of ICR. Before we get into the next episode, I wanted to ask that you subscribe to the show. It'll help us get even more unique and interesting guests on the podcast and in turn continue to educate management teams and the growing ecosystem that creates value for fast-growing private and public companies. And while you're at it, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Very much appreciated.
We do process hundreds of billions of dollars of payments. We have the highest pay at the table average. Over 90% of every transaction that happens at that table in sit-down restaurants with the Ziosk is being paid through the Ziosk.
Have you ever finished a great meal at a restaurant only to have to wait 15 minutes for your overworked server to bring you the bill? Well, Ziosk's pay-at-the-table solutions are helping restaurants make sure that doesn't happen. And the incredible amount of data they collect in the process helps their partners boost efficiency and improve customer experience in ways that go far beyond payment.
I do believe that as you start to think about where we're going and what this platform could really mean, it is really taking all of that data and making it real actionable insights in the moment.
My name is Tom Ryan, and this is Welcome to the Arena, the ICR podcast. Each week, I sit down with today's business leaders to give you an inside scoop on some of America's most prosperous public companies, their origins, their challenges, and the keys to their success. Our guest today is Rhonda Levene, the CEO of Ziosk, a leading digital hospitality platform serving major restaurant brands such as Chili's, Texas Roadhouse, and Red Robin, among others. Since joining Ziosk in 2020 and being appointed CEO in 2024, Rhonda has spearheaded the company's transformation into a SaaS-driven enterprise, including new innovations like the Ziosk Pro Server tablet and DigiSite. Rhonda has 3 decades of executive leadership experience, including senior roles at Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. She's also a longtime advocate for women in leadership, actively participating in organizations that help women grow their careers. Let's enter the arena with Rhonda Levene. Isn't there something in the Constitution that says you can't work at Coke and Pepsi? Or like, that's pretty cool. Tell us about your background and take us all the way up to the Ziosk opportunity that came your way.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I can do that probably in a snapshot, but I actually started my career in finance. And actually, I joined Coca-Cola as a financial analyst early in my career.
Oh, interesting.
And so working for obviously one of the biggest brands in the world, most recognizable at the time, of course, and getting into the whole world of consumers and marketing, it wasn't a better place to learn. And then most certainly what happened was I was in the hospitality division of Coca-Cola. So this begins the journey of intersecting with restaurants. And so it was a really great journey, and I worked there for quite a while, about 14 years actually, and had 7 different roles. Some great leaders and managers that I worked for that encouraged me to cross the line and move from finance into sales and marketing. So I had the opportunity then to move over into general management roles and start running divisions and departments across all functions of the business. And it became a game changer, because a lot more interaction with customers, front and center of running a business. And then ultimately, after I left Coke, wasn't really planning to go to Pepsi. It kind of just came up in some things that they were trying to do strategically. PepsiCo has brands besides beverage. They have food brands.
Yep.
And then they most certainly operate in a very broad global scale as well. And so I had the opportunity to come over and lead divisions for PepsiCo, now learning the food side of the business. So expanding that. But again, all in restaurants, hospitality. And so as a result of that, I've got a very, very strong foundation of what it took to run a business. And I treated my division like its own business. I had a P&L. And so when I left the big Fortune 50 and started running mid-sized companies, early stage companies, I took all those skills and then obviously had to manage which ones you can bring into a small company and which ones are left for a larger size. But it gave me a really great lens on managing end-to-end of a business and all aspects of a business.
Yeah. And then how did the Ziosk opportunity come to you?
So the Ziosk opportunity is amazing because the founder, Jack Baum of Ziosk, he and I crossed paths at PepsiCo. So we were running an innovation summit, and PepsiCo had invited different entrepreneurs to come in who were innovating in the restaurant and hospitality space. And it may be hard to believe, but back in 2010, there was no way to pay at a table than other through a credit card or cash.
Yeah.
Unless you were integrated into the POS. And nobody was. There was, no Apple Pay, no Google Wallet, none of that. And so Ziosk was pioneering pay at the table because the founder, as a restaurant entrepreneur, knew that was the biggest pain point in his restaurant was the customers were ready to go and they couldn't find the waiter or they couldn't get out in time. And so it was just a bad way to leave the experience. And so he and I crossed paths there, and he and I just maintained that relationship over the years and reconnected back in 20 during COVID and said, hey, how about coming and joining our journey? And so it's been something I'd been thinking about for a while and thought it would be a great experience. Even though I don't have technology in my background, I have a lot of the other pieces. Maybe this would be a great way to round off and bring technology under the hood here.
Everything happens for a reason. For those people who aren't familiar with Ziosk, it's more than a product, it's a platform. Maybe describe the company as it is today.
That's right. Well, we started as pay at the table, but it really was built as a digital hospitality platform, even back in the day, because we are unique in that we have a screen in front of the guest. And as someone who comes from a consumer branding background, anytime you have something in front of your guest, it's impacting your brand. And so there you were. So you have opportunities not only to allow pay at the table, but you have the opportunity to promote products that you want to sell, the latest margarita that you have, entice me into the new dessert, most certainly sign up for my loyalty program. The surveys, we get 50 times the amount of survey responses in any other venue. I'm not a person who follows up on that email the next day to tell me about an experience I had 24 hours ago or 2 days ago.
Right.
So we get that guest feedback right in the moment, which in the restaurant industry is really important so they can make real changes and get that guest back. And so all of those elements came together in this hospitality platform with the payment app kind of being at the core as our killer app, and then built around that of what is the experience that the restaurant wants to bring to that guest. And then in the meantime, we're supplementing the waiter and the wait staff and making it more efficient for them. So there's less steps, hopefully larger tips, which we see on the Ziosk because the guest is having a better experience and more satisfied.
Yeah. And you're doing this at quite a scale. I was reading, billions of transactions every year, hundreds of millions of guests. What are those numbers, Rhonda?
So we've got 2 million eyeballs on a Ziosk every single day.
That's staggering.
It is staggering. So, again, when you think about the old days, if you will, billboards driving down a highway, and how long are you seeing that? This screen is on a table in front of the guest for 35 to 40 minutes, which is an average kind of dining time for a casual dine restaurant. That's a lot of screen time. And it's not that you want to interrupt the experience. You don't want to be a television ad or a billboard ad, but you most certainly want to complement the experience. Hey, make it easy for me to sign up for loyalty. Make it easy for me to get my next drink order, my refill, while the waiter's off getting my entree in the kitchen, things like that. So how can we use those screens as a way to make my experience better? And, we do process hundreds of billions of dollars of payments. We have the highest pay at the table average across whether it's a QR code, whether it's a mobile app. We're averaging over 90% of every transaction that happens at that table in sit-down restaurants with a Ziosk is being paid through the Ziosk.
When you talk about the ROI for your customers, restaurant chains, you really touch labor, revenue, loyalty, the guest experience. I want like a rapid fire. Let's go down each one. How do you optimize labor? How do you help in that P&L line item?
So it's real easy. And we actually, it's going to go live on our website probably in a few days, is an ROI calculator.
Oh, wow.
And that ROI calculator actually walks through all of those elements. So table turn times is really important. If you've ever been to a Texas Roadhouse, there's usually a line out the door. They need to turn those tables and to be efficient. So we have a table turn time. Can we get that next guest in there, right? We also have, if you think about the number of steps and the amount of time that the waiter has to print out the check, bring it to the table, get your card, take it back, bring it back, those steps and those minutes start adding up. And so actually when you put in the average number of minutes saved, it translates into, okay, I can have a wait staff that now can have 6 tables or 8 tables instead of 4 and give a better experience to the guest. And that translates into real labor savings.
Yep.
Don't even get me started on we're not printing paper, we're not tearing down trees and all those sorts of things that go along with. There's a whole lot of ancillary. There's also the survey information. that we provide the customer that they can't get anywhere else. They don't have to pay a third party for that. It's real time, it's in the moment, and we can get that through the Ziosk. We also have premium content, gameplay, believe it or not. There is interest at the table, and most certainly tables with families. And it's a $2.99 all you play games during the experience. There's lots of intangible things. Think about a turnover time in the restaurant of the amount of turnover in restaurants, super, super high. But if we can provide higher tips and the waiters feel like they're going to get higher tips because the guest is satisfied, that's going to reduce turnover time. And it's interesting, we had a near competitor who's no longer a near competitor. That was the only other tabletop solution in the marketplace. They didn't have a lot of customers. They had a few. We end up winning those customers, and they are no longer in that space, so we replaced them. But one of the customers that we took, they evaluated, do I need to go continue having a tabletop solution? And they did the math the other way, and they couldn't afford to go backwards. They said, I can't go backwards because I can't put the labor back in. I have to have this assistant at the table, besides all the other great things it does. Our competitor, wasn't performing well for them. They said, if you can outperform and you can deliver this, we need you because we can't go back and put labor costs back in.
Talk about the economic model of the business. I know you had a pivot to kind of a SaaS business model. Maybe talk about that pivot, how the decision was made, and what that does for you.
When I joined Ziosk, and this was something that Jack Baum, the founder, and I talked about early on, actually in the early days, the company was known as, oh, you're that company that has that hardware on the table. And they would name a customer, And I'm like, okay, we're not really a hardware company. That's not who we are and what we do. But that's how we were known. That was the perception at the time. And it had continued and lingered. And I believe, and hopefully you see as well, in all the things that we're doing and all of our interfaces, that we've moved the dial and being the hardware on the table. When you're a hardware company, it's a very different business model, right? We're not a POS company. We are agnostic to POS, to loyalty, to payment processors. We integrate to all of them. So we're Switzerland. We walk into a restaurant, we don't require them to move all of their technology. So we are a very agile platform that allows integration into what you already have to facilitate an operation in the front of the house. That's what we do. And so it just didn't make sense for the way the model was being run. It was being run more like closer to what a POS would, where you sell the terminals and then you go provide the service. And so let's go wrap this and really make this a true platform of software services, and the cost of the tablets gets embedded essentially in that, and really focus in on what all those solutions are that the restaurants need to succeed.
Think about the sheer volume of transactions they process every day. You've got to figure that Ziosk is sitting on an unbelievable treasure trove of information about consumer behavior. I wanted to know from Rhonda how that data could be leveraged to benefit their partners.
I think that's one of the areas. I joined the business in 2020 during COVID, which was a really interesting time and a hard time for the industry, of course. We came out of COVID. There was a little bit of a turn, had to happen with everybody, of course, and us as well. We have a lot of data, but it hadn't really been mined. And we were a little archaic and, just like everybody else, we had data warehouses. Well, okay, data warehouse is a little flat. That's just a bunch of data. What are you going to do with it? And how do you make it information? And then ultimately, how do you make that information smart and actionable, right? So we've been evolving our tech stack into next gen. And as a part of that was a huge transformation around data, because you'll hear a lot about AI, and we talk about AI and where we're trying to go with that. But it all starts with clean data and the ability to access that data efficiently.
Yep.
And that's one of the things that we're learning. So we needed to really evolve that. So we've been on a journey the last couple of years of getting that data in a way where it's accessible and it's formatted in a way that then we can bring it into these agentic AI models that we're building and do something with it.
Yeah.
So it knows what we're talking about. And I do believe that as you start to think about where we're going and what this platform could really mean, it is really taking all of that data and making it real actionable insights in the moment.
Well, it sounds like you have an incredible commitment to innovation, and what you're talking about with data and AI is part of that. Also, some of the products and innovations you brought to market, like Drop and Pay and DigiCite. Maybe you can talk about some of these innovations that you've brought to market or are bringing to market that are going to make the platform stickier and stronger.
Absolutely. That was one of the things that was really a focus of mine when I came in. I grew up in the world of big brands and consumers. One brand does not fit all.
Yeah.
One solution does not fit all. So when I came into Ziosk, there was one solution. I'm like, okay, that's not going to work because people have different needs.
Right.
And so that's where we started to evolve into our Z Mini, which looks like a large iPhone from a size perspective on a table. It's a smaller footprint. It's sleeker. It does all the same things, but just works better. We didn't need a printer anymore. And then what about the handheld? What about restaurants that, want to have a more upscale experience and therefore they're not going to want to put anything on the table, but they still want to facilitate the guest leaving. That's where drop and pay came in. So if you go to a high-end steakhouse, for example, how can the waiter in the right environment bring that to the table experience so I can control the outcome of when I leave without it being disruptive, without it looking like I'm a casual dine when I'm an upscale? So the drop and pay is just another sleek form factor that meets the need, whether it's at curbside, whether it's in the bar, whether it's in, a white tablecloth. Digicide is actually a way to facilitate, again, just making it easier for the wait staff and being able to move our tablets from experiences, whether it's on the patio, whether it's at the bar, whether it's on the table, in a seamless way without it putting extra steps or extra clicks on the waiter. And so, there's a lot going on that wait staff is trying to do and trying to make that easier for them and more efficient. And Digicite does that. It also ultimately, and some of the things we're working on, is leading us to this idea of personalization, which you're probably going to hear about that a lot if you haven't already in the industry. How do I know my guests when they walk in the door, not just when they leave? And Digicite and some of the things that we're working on there is a way for us to start to know the guest at the beginning of the experience and potentially curate the experience based on what we know about the guest that they've told us about themselves as a loyal customer of that brand.
How do you think about innovation versus investment and running the business? Meaning, you can only have so much CapEx in any given year, and it's so critical. There's a lot of competitors and you want to always be ahead. How do you think about how much you invest versus the practicality of trying to run a profitable business and expanding and growing revenue and all of that stuff?
Tom, that's a really good question. And for me, even more so inside a technology company, because I can't think of an industry that moves faster than technology, right?
Yeah.
So there's always somebody out there in their garage or in their home bedroom figuring something out, and it's going to change the world because that's what happens. So it's on my mind all the time. However, at the same time, we have to determine what are the things that are foundational to our business to support the business we have and continue to grow and be profitable and strong so that when that innovation we want to bring to market, we're strong enough to handle that. And so it's a pull every single day. I did hire a chief innovation officer when I came on board. We didn't have a product officer. We didn't have an innovation officer. I said, we're going to need that. And it is really hard. Those people like to envision all the time and go in lots of different directions.
Oh, yeah. They love to spend money.
And ours does as well. So trying to keep them very focused, of being very thoughtful about let's pick 2 or 3 things, because we were also, as I mentioned, re-engineering our tech stack. And whether it's data, whether it's Digicite, whether it's personalization, I have to have some of the newer agile technology to do it. So it really has been a balancing act of a little bit of looking at the roadmap, being thoughtful about when you can bring all that innovation, but making sure you have the foundation and core to run the business and to support the future innovation.
Yeah, and just staying on the innovation theme, I have to think that a lot of that comes directly from customer feedback. Maybe you could give us an interesting example of like some insight that came from the customer that led directly to some innovation that you brought out into the market.
Well, I most certainly believe this idea of personalization, that they said, okay, you've helped us with operational efficiency. You're helping us bring a good experience to the guest at the table. We're able to drive sales and drive, average check. You're helping us do all those things. How do you help us get the biggest thing, which obviously they want frequency, right? How do we get someone who's only coming to our restaurant 1 time a year to 2 times a year? And everybody believes that personalization is a way to start to kind of own that guest a little bit in their mind share. So I don't think that was more of an insight in that it's super important for differentiation. And again, coming from the brand world, I actually view all of our customers' brands uniquely. Just because they're in a casual dine space doesn't mean all brands are created equal. Each brand has its own essence to bring to that experience, and we have to be able to curate our solution to meet that brand. And so just, understanding what the CEO of Brinker wants versus the CEO of Texas Roadhouse versus the CEO of Outback, what's important to them and where are they leaning in relative to what they're trying to accomplish with the brand. So really understanding those nuances and making sure that, what are the top 3 things that we can help them with and building our innovation to meet those needs.
Rhonda, how do you look at your total addressable market? Obviously, casual dining is seemingly right up the power alley, but can you move into QSR? How are you with the little independents? I live in New England. There's a lot of independent mom and pops and stuff. How do you think about your total addressable market?
So what we did is interesting. It's different. Some companies start out going to the independent market. Toast, for example, is well known, and that was their approach. They started down market.
Yep.
Ziosk started up market. So our customers have predominantly been enterprise, full service, specifically casual dine restaurants. So we have amazing brands in our portfolio. We believe that based on the agility of our technology that we have today, that we can go into mid-market and there's so much value that we could bring to them that they just don't have access today because they don't have the resources of a large enterprise brand. And whether it's surveys or knowing the guest, there's huge value, maybe even exponentially, because of what they don't have. So we most certainly can go into mid-market and go down market for full service restaurants. I will tell you, we haven't cracked the code on QSR yet. Not that we're not working on it. We have some interesting conversations going on because we are primarily an on-premise solution. And when you think about a QSR, it's primarily an off-premise solution and pretty much going to that. But that doesn't mean that some of our innovation can't help there. And it doesn't mean that this intelligence platform that we're building doesn't have application into retail or to QSR. Or most certainly, I'd love to go into hotels. I have a big affinity with the hospitality in general. How do we bring in that experience into the restaurant or dining experience in hotels, which sometimes can be clunky because they just don't have the service to support it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Switching gears a little bit, Rhonda, what's the most important or interesting lesson you've learned as CEO thus far?
This is going to be probably oversaid, but you've always heard it's always about the people. I think I was a little surprised, shouldn't have been, because even in every management leadership job, the amount of time that I spend on thinking about the organization, thinking about the people, understanding, do we have the people we need? Do we have the roles that we need? Are they being supported? Are they being developed? And I spend an exorbitant amount of time really making sure that our leaders are thinking through what we need with people. And I am involved in a lot of the interviews, not every position, but a lot of the interviews of making sure we get the right talent, because at the end of the day, we can have the best strategy in the world. And I've learned the lesson the hard way. If you don't have the right people in the right seats at the right time, you're not going to be able to execute that great strategy.
Yeah, speaking of developing people, did you have a mentor that was a big influence on you in your career?
I was very, very fortunate. There was I speak at a lot of women's events and industry events, and I worked mostly for men when I started out my career. There weren't a lot of women sitting at the seat in the leadership of the roles that I was in. But I worked for some leaders, and one of them particularly at Coca-Cola, that was the one that said to me, you need to think about going across the lines here. You need to think bigger than what you're thinking about. And he literally kind of threw me into the deep end. Yeah. Go meet with customers. Go handle this. It didn't even give me a lot of direction.
Yeah. Figure it out.
You can do it. Figure it out. I'm going to throw you over the fence. And, I had this whole track in my mind I was going to build to the CFO role. And I had a lot of expertise across all that. And so it's kind of like, it's like you're an SME. And now somebody's saying, I'm going to throw you over the fence to everything you're not an SME out of sales, marketing, operations. And you're going to figure it out. And you're going to lead people who are SMEs in that, and you don't come from that. And it was something that I thought long and hard about. I wasn't sure I was going to like it, and I ultimately loved it. But it opened a door for me. It changed the trajectory of where I thought I could go and what I could do, because he gave me that opportunity and believed in me. And I know it's hard to believe, but at that time, this was back at Coca-Cola, back in the 90s, people didn't cross lines in big companies. You were hired as the salesperson. You were hired as the marketing person. You were trained that way. And they never actually had a finance leader move into leading a sales and marketing. Not at that time. It's changed now. The CFO wasn't becoming the CEOs of companies. I was surprised Coke didn't push back on it because they really had never had done that. He had a lot of influence and opened that door for me. And then I was off to the races. And I really credit him with challenging me to get outside my comfort zone.
Yeah, it's such a cool story, and a lot of times people from the finance area, it just doesn't work if they go into a different area. I always get on like an airplane and, I have no room for my legs. They're like cramming you into the seats. And I always think, I bet the CFO designed this plane. You know what I'm saying? So like when you go to the other side, it's like an eye opener, right? Because it's not purely by the numbers, it's people, it's decisions, it's all the give and take of that, right? It's just, you have such a cool background for it, I think.
Well, I don't think that, I think finance is foundational in any business.
Yeah.
But I don't lead with it, to your point. And I do believe the experiences at Coke and Pepsi and thinking about it and looking at through a consumer lens, through a guest lens, first always, because if you win with the guest, you're going to win. And you can figure out the numbers. There's always a way to figure out how to make the economics work, but you'll never make it work long term and have a sustainable, profitable business if you're not winning with the guest.
What do you think about looking into the rest of 25, 26, and 27? What are you seeing in terms of like expansion in the casual dining space or just restaurants, new units in general? A lot of uncertainty out there. What are you seeing?
We have a very, very robust pipeline. We have a lot of pilots under the way, actually in some concepts that you might not think of traditionally for us as well. And, I think it changed, and it changed after COVID, because if you've been around the restaurant industry, technology they were not really on the forefront.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still some companies that have POSs that are 20 years old. They're like, I don't want to go invest, and that's a sunk cost. I don't want to do that. I got other things I got to fix, right? And so technology was not on the forefront. Then they found out during COVID, this isn't going to work if I don't have any way to access the consumer guests when they can't come to the restaurant.
Yeah.
And then you came out of COVID, and now the industry all talks about we can't make it work because they can't find the labor, the cost, the margins are being squeezed. So they go, okay, now we have to have technology, but what is the right mix of technology? And so I really do believe that that's evolving and has evolved the last few years. And as a result of that, there's been demand that's created. We are not a nice to have, we are a must have. Where are you going to get 90% pay at the table and reduce your labor costs, by 15%? Where are you going to get that, right? You're not going to get it on a QR code. They already tried that during COVID and it didn't work, right? It fell flat because it was too hard. The guests didn't want to do that at the table. And so technology, I believe when I look forward for the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to continue to evolve, but it needs to become more seamless into the experience for me as the guest and for the operator. It's getting there, but we're still a little clunky. And I do believe that the AI and some of the solutions behind that, with the right human element piece of it, is going to facilitate a more seamless integration of technology and overall dining experience, no matter where you are. And I just see that every day. And I think we'll look back 5 years from now and go, wow, we were just at the beginning of what technology looks like in the restaurant and hospitality.
That was Rhonda Levene, the CEO of Ziosk, a pioneer in pay-at-the-table technology, and the platform has evolved to include guest engagement, feedback, and data collection. The company drives significant ROI for clients and adds tremendous value around labor, revenue, loyalty, and guest satisfaction. And all that, along with their commitment to innovation, makes me really excited about Ziosk's potential for growth in the years to come. I'm Tom Ryan. We'll see you next time back in the arena.
References to specific stocks are not intended to be recommendations for specific trading behavior. Comments presented on this podcast are intended for informational and educational purposes only, and do not represent opinions or recommendations on whether to buy, sell, or hold shares of a particular stock. All investors are advised to conduct their own independent research into individual stocks before making a trading decision. In addition, investors are advised that past stock performance is no guarantee of future price performance.